Hello YouTube, the arranged clown here. You'll note the hair. I just want to do a quick video. It's about Ukraine. Just kind of want to explain my rather bellicose posts that I've done. And I'll start by saying that I subscribe to a website called Global Pen Pals. And it just lets you correspond with people from all over the world. And I enjoy talking. Well, I guess you can call it talking. I'll just call it talking for, I don't know, why not? Where you can talk and correspond about various worldwide things. And I had, keyword being had, a Russian pen pal. And her and we would talk about all sorts of things, really. The Bolshevik Revolution, was Lenin really a German agent? Just stuff like that. Just a lot of, Russian history. She described to me, what a drone strike was like. We are extremely lucky here in America not to have to deal with the drone strike. Just all sorts of things. And then Sumy happened. And I remember sending her an email and saying, "What happened with Sumy? And what do you think about that?" And her response was just excuses. And so I wrote back and I was like, "No, those are not acceptable excuses." And her response to that was, "Well, if you want to live in your lies, then that's up to you." To which I replied, "I can see through your Marxist BS about false consciousness, and I reject it. We're done." And then I blocked her. So no more corresponding with her. Besides that was having some, shall we say, unintended consequences closer to home. But rest assured, that is blocked. No more will I ever correspond with that person. And I just want to use this video to address some of the lies that the Russians are using to justify Sumy and the massacre of innocent civilians. And I'll start with probably the most common one, which is NATO and Ukrainian officials were meeting to talk about long-range cruise missile strikes in Russia. So they try to make it sound like, oh, well, it was self-defense. I'm not buying it. First off, it just sounds too accusatory. Sounds like they're trying to shift the focus away from their behavior onto others. And even then, for argument's sake, let's say that there really were meetings between Ukrainian and NATO officials about launching cruise missile strikes into Russia. All right, let's just say for argument's sake, Sumy would be the last place they would meet. If you look at military history, border regions are notorious for espionage. In World War I, in Flanders, when the British, the French, the Belgians, and us Americans were fighting the Germans, there were citizens of Flanders who actively supported Germany. They actually spied for Germany. I've read about that in the World War I stuff I've read. During the Cold War, on both sides of the Berlin Wall, there were spy networks, very, very extensive. On the East German side, there were a lot of spies who were spying on West Germany, and on the West German side, there were a bunch of spies in East Germany. And so what I'm saying is, border regions are not the best place to have a highly sensitive meeting. I mean, come on. use a brain cell. It's not the best place to have highly sensitive meetings about strategy. Um, the fact is that that the possibility, better said, of there being any NATO or Ukrainian officials going to church are remote to none. There were civilians going to church on Palm Sunday. That's it. And if there were actual talks, and I don't know if there are or not, I do know that Germany has been hesitant to give Ukraine their latest cruise missile technology, the Taurus, I believe it's called. Um, but Germany is considering giving it to the Ukrainians now because of Sumy, um, although that's still being discussed apparently. If those meetings are being held, they would not be held at a place full of spies where Russia could easily spy. I mean, come on. Second excuse is, well, it was a mistake. Uh-uh. I watched a video about the technical aspects of the missiles used, and they are ballistic missiles, and these missiles are very accurate to plus or minus 19 feet because of the guidance methods and whatnot. There's no way, as the video pointed out, that these missiles could have just careened off course and accidentally hit the bus. They had to directly target that. The technology is too sophisticated, it's too modern to just malfunction. So it was not a mistake. And that's where I part ways with Trump. I support Trump on lots of things, but I'm going to have to part ways with Trump on that. And, you know, politicians are bound to disappoint, and Trump has disappointed me on that one. So the other excuse is that it was collateral damage. And I saw this, there's a kind of a round table European style thing. I think it may have been in the UK or possibly Europe. I don't know. But they had all these representatives of these countries, and they were together in this, room talking geopolitics. And the Russian said, have we forgotten collateral damage? Well, I'm going to address that comment. Taking out officials and high ranking political and military officials is not new. And Obama started doing it during his term in office, and he's been accused of using drones too much. I don't know where to stand on that. That may be the one thing I do support of Obama, the only thing, pretty much. But the militarily accepted way since then has always been to use a drone. It's what the Israelis do against Hamas. They use drones. They target the terrorist, the high ranking official, and they use a drone. It's surgical. It's not general, it's not wiping out entire blocks. It's not wiping out buildings that have nothing to do with military use. It's just a quick surgical strike. It's brutal. It's ugly, but hey, that's war, all right? Let's just call a spade a spade. What the Soviets did is they took a ballistic missile and blew up a city block of civilians going to and from church. Okay. There's video of people inside the church just celebrating Palm Sunday, and the whole church just shook. Okay, that's not a surgical drone strike. And furthermore, what the Soviets did, what the Russians did, is they did a terrorist move, which is a secondary attack. So this is pretty well known by this point. They'll do the first strike, and then, of course, there'll be victims. And then first responders get there, and then they'll do a second attack. And now there's not only more victims, but the rescuers are also themselves wounded or otherwise. And it just, it's it's scary, it's frightening. But that's what terrorists do. Well, with Sumy, the Soviets did their first missile, and the first responders came. And then, as the first responders were tending to the wounded, they launched a second missile and dropped cluster munitions over the first responders. For those of you who don't know what a cluster munition is, imagine, if you will, a missile full of, for lack of a better term, grenades that flies over an area, spins around, drops the grenades, and there's these little grenades start going off. Pretty scary stuff. Horrible, horrible stuff. They did that as the Russians did that as the first responders were tending to the wounded. This was not just collateral damage. This was an intentional infliction of terrorism on the Ukrainian people. And then I would add to that I think it was a bit of revenge. The Soviets are starting to have a shortage of tanks because they have a way of getting blown up. And the Soviets, on is about April 8th, they launched this huge massive offense against the Ukrainians. They had 100 tanks, armored personnel carriers. They were going to carry that line and knock the Ukrainians out, and the Ukrainians just blew up every single tank and armored personnel carrier. Bear in mind, this is a time when the Soviets are so desperate for transportation, they're driving passenger cars, golf carts, and ATVs to get to the battlefield. So that's pretty devastating. I'm sure there were some angry feelings there on the Soviets' part. And so I think that being timed so close to the peace negotiations, that failed to get leverage. So I think the Soviets just said, well, let's launch a terror attack on a bunch of people going to church so that when we sit down for the treaty negotiations, we'll have a position of power. It's cold, it's calculated, it's evil. It's a war crime. And I look forward to a tribunal being held to try those war criminals. An international tribunal. And I think we can learn a lot from post-World War II, the way we dealt with the Nazis. We need to do the same thing with the Russians. So, anyways, that's where I stand on things, but, it's pretty bad. Just in closing, I just want to say this because this video is getting really long. It's pretty bad when I see fit to just end my correspondence with someone in a global pen pal site, but I just cannot tolerate that. I will not talk to evil people. So, all right, if you have comments, questions, please feel free to put them in there. Okay,